The blood on Tabitha Grayson's dress had long since dried to a rust-colored stain, but Sheriff Morton looked at her as if she had painted it there herself for theatrical effect. She stood in the cramped law office in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, her hands trembling as she tried once more to make them understand what she had witnessed in the pre-dawn hours of that terrible morning in September 1878. The lawman leaned back in his chair, tobacco juice staining the corner of his mouth, and she knew before he even spoke that her words had fallen on deaf ears yet again. "Miss Grayson, we have been over this 3 times now," Sheriff Morton said, his voice carrying the wearied patience of a man addressing a hysterical child. "You claim you saw Samuel Garrett and his men murder your brother in cold blood, dump his body in the ravine west of town, and then burn down your family's homestead to cover their tracks. Yet when my deputy rode out there, he found no body, no burned buildings, and certainly no evidence of any crime whatsoever." Tabitha felt tears of frustration burn behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was 22 years old, had been managing her family's small ranch since her father died 2 years prior, and she would not be reduced to a weeping female for these men to dismiss even more readily. "Because Garrett moved everything. I told you he has half the territory in his pocket. Your deputy probably warned him you were coming." The sheriff's face darkened. "That is a serious accusation, Miss Grayson. Deputy Hayes is a fine lawman. Just because you have convinced yourself of some elaborate conspiracy does not mean—" "My brother is dead!" The words tore from her throat, raw and desperate. "Thomas is dead, and Samuel Garrett killed him because Thomas discovered Garrett has been stealing water rights from homesteaders all across the county. He has been buying up land through intimidation and violence, and anyone who stands against him disappears." "Fantasies," Sheriff Morton said flatly. "Samuel Garrett is a respected businessman and landowner. He sits on the town council. For heaven's sake, what possible reason would he have to kill a dirt-poor rancher's son?" The words stung because they were partially true. The Grayson ranch was small, struggling, barely profitable, but Thomas had been good with numbers, had a mind that could untangle complex patterns, and he had spent weeks documenting Garrett's schemes. He had discovered forged deeds, falsified water claims, and a network of corruption that stretched from Oklahoma City all the way to the territorial capital. And now Thomas was dead, his body hidden somewhere in the vast Oklahoma wilderness, and his sister's testimony was being dismissed as the ravings of a grief-stricken woman prone to hysteria. "If you cannot provide evidence, Miss Grayson, there is nothing more I can do," the sheriff said, standing to indicate their conversation was over. "I suggest you go home, rest, and stop spreading these slanderous accusations. Mr. Garrett is within his rights to pursue legal action against you for defamation." Tabitha left the sheriff's office feeling hollowed out, as if all the life had been scooped from inside her chest. The late morning sun beat down on Oklahoma City's dusty Main Street, and she was aware of eyes watching her from storefronts and boardwalks. Some looked at her with pity, others with suspicion. Word had spread quickly about the crazy Grayson girl who was making wild accusations against one of the town's most prominent citizens. She climbed onto the buckboard wagon she had driven into town, her hands mechanically taking up the reins. The horse, a sturdy mare named Bess, turned her head as if in sympathy. Tabitha urged her forward, heading back toward the ranch, though she knew it would feel emptier than ever without Thomas there. The journey took most of the afternoon. The Grayson Ranch sat on a modest parcel of land about 8 miles outside Oklahoma City, nestled in a valley where a creek provided precious water for their small herd of cattle. As Tabitha approached, she could see everything was exactly as she had left it, the barn standing intact, the house showing no signs of fire damage. Of course not. After Garrett's men had killed Thomas and she had fled into the darkness, they had simply left. The burned homestead she had mentioned to the sheriff had been her frantic, terrified mind in those first horrified moments, but by the time she had gathered courage to return after hiding through the night, she had found everything eerily normal. They had taken Thomas's body, cleaned up the blood, and left no trace of their crime. She had searched desperately for Thomas's documentation, the careful records he had been compiling against Garrett, but those papers had vanished too. Garrett's men had been thorough. As she unhitched Bess and led her to water, Tabitha heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart seized with fear until she recognized the rider. Isaiah Jenkins was a ranch hand who worked for several of the smaller homesteaders in the area, taking temporary work wherever it was needed. He was 26 years old, lean and weather-worn, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He had worked for the Graysons periodically over the past year, and Thomas had trusted him. "Miss Grayson," Isaiah said, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. "Heard you went to see the sheriff again?" "For all the good it did," Tabitha said bitterly. She finished securing Bess in her stall and turned to face him. "They think I am insane, or a liar. Probably both." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "I know you are neither. Thomas talked to me, showed me some of what he had found. I should have paid closer attention, should have made copies of those records." He pulled his hat off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I am sorry about your brother, Miss Grayson. He was a good man." The kindness in his voice nearly broke through her carefully maintained composure. "Thank you," she managed, "but sympathy does not bring him back or put his killer behind bars." "No," Isaiah agreed. "Evidence does that, and I aim to help you find it." Tabitha studied him, hope and skepticism warring in her chest. "Why would you do that?" "If Garrett is as dangerous as Thomas believed, and I know he is, then involving yourself could get you killed." "Because it is the right thing to do," Isaiah said simply. "And because I spent enough time talking with Thomas to know he was onto something real, Garrett is not going to stop with your brother. He will keep stealing land, keep destroying lives, until someone stands up to him with proof that cannot be ignored." The determination in his eyes kindled something in Tabitha that had nearly been extinguished by the sheriff's dismissal. "You believe me?" "Every word," Isaiah confirmed. "Now where did Thomas keep his records? Where did he do his research?" "In the house, in his room, but Garrett's men took everything," Tabitha said. "I searched everywhere. The papers are gone." Isaiah nodded slowly, his mind clearly working through possibilities. Thomas was smart. He might have made copies, hidden them somewhere safe. Did he have any particular places he liked to go? Anywhere he might have stashed important documents? Tabitha thought hard, trying to remember her brother's habits. He spent a lot of time at the creek, especially that bend where the cottonwood trees grow thick. He said it helped him think. "Then that is where we start," Isaiah said. "It will be dark soon. We should go at first light, search that area thoroughly. If Thomas hid copies of his evidence, that would be exactly the kind of place he would choose, private, known only to family." They agreed to meet at dawn, and Isaiah rode off toward the small cabin he rented closer to town. Tabitha went into the house, the silence of it pressing against her like a physical weight. She prepared a simple dinner of beans and cornbread that she barely tasted, then lay in her bed staring at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged her into fitful sleep. She dreamed of Thomas, of his easy laugh and quick mind, of the way he had always believed they could make something good of their small ranch despite the odds stacked against them. In her dream, he was trying to tell her something, pointing toward the creek, but she could not hear his words over the roar of rushing water. When she woke, the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east. She dressed quickly in practical clothes, braided her honey-colored hair back from her face, and was outside saddling Bess when she saw Isaiah riding up the path. He had brought supplies, she noticed, including a couple of shovels strapped to his saddle. "Morning, Miss Grayson," he greeted her. "Ready to do some detective work?" "Please, call me Tabitha," she said. "I think if we are going to be searching for evidence that might get us both killed, we can dispense with formalities." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough. And you can call me Isaiah, though I suspect you have been anyway, at least in your head." She found herself almost smiling back, which felt strange after days of nothing but grief and fear. They rode together toward the creek, the morning air still cool and sweet with the scent of prairie grass. As they traveled, Isaiah asked her questions about Thomas, about what her brother had discovered trying to piece together the scope of Garrett's operation. Thomas found a pattern, Tabitha explained as they rode. Garrett would target homesteaders who had good water access. First, he would make them a low-ball offer for their land. When they refused, strange things would start happening. Fences cut, cattle gone missing, wells suddenly running dry. The settlers would get desperate, and Garrett would swoop in with another offer, still low but better than nothing. Most people took it rather than face complete ruin. And those who still refused? Isaiah asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. They disappeared or died in accidents that were not really accidents at all, Tabitha said. Thomas documented at least 6 cases over the past 3 years. A rancher named Cooper, supposedly killed when his horse threw him. A widow named Mrs. Fletcher, whose house burned down with her inside. A family named Hutchins, who were said to have just packed up and moved east, except none of their relatives ever heard from them again. Isaiah's expression was grim. And the law did nothing? The law is either blind or bought, Tabitha said flatly. Sheriff Morton has been in his position for 10 years. I do not know if Garrett owns him outright or if Morton just finds it easier to look the other way, but the result is the same. They reached the creek and dismounted, tethering their horses to the cottonwood trees that grew thick along the banks. The water ran clear and cool over smooth stones, creating a peaceful burbling sound that seemed at odds with the dark purpose of their search. Thomas loved this spot, Tabitha said softly. When we were children, we would come here to fish and tell stories. After our parents died, he still came here to think. Isaiah began searching the area methodically, checking the bases of trees, looking for disturbed earth, any sign that something might have been buried or hidden. Tabitha did the same, trying to think like her brother. Where would he have hidden important papers? They needed to be protected from weather, from animals, from accidental discovery. An hour passed, then another. The sun climbed higher, and Tabitha felt hope beginning to fade. Perhaps Thomas had not hidden copies after all. Perhaps Garrett's men had been even more thorough than she feared. Then Isaiah called out, "Tabitha, come look at this." She hurried to where he stood beside one of the largest cottonwoods. He was pointing at something carved into the bark, old enough to have partially healed but still visible. It was a symbol, 3 lines intersecting in a particular pattern. "Do you recognize this?" Isaiah asked. Tabitha's breath caught. "Yes, that is our father's mark. He used it to brand our cattle, to sign documents. Thomas would have known I would recognize it." They searched around the tree with renewed energy, and finally Isaiah knelt down near a cluster of roots. "The earth here has been disturbed and then carefully replaced." He began digging with his hands, then with one of the shovels carefully removing soil until his shovel struck something solid but yielding. He pulled out an oilskin-wrapped package about the size of a large book. Tabitha's heart hammered as Isaiah unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a leather document case, the kind lawyers use to protect important papers. With trembling fingers, Tabitha opened the case. Inside were dozens of pages covered in Thomas's careful handwriting, along with what appeared to be original documents, deeds, water rights certificates, and contracts. Her brother had documented everything: names, dates, properties, methods. There were copies of forged signatures, records of payments made to various officials, and a detailed map showing all the properties Garrett had acquired through fraud and violence. "This is it," Tabitha breathed. "This is everything Thomas found. This proves all of it." Isaiah was reading over her shoulder, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is not just Garrett. He has accomplices all through the territorial government, judges, county clerks, even someone in the land office in Guthrie." "Which is why going to Sheriff Morton was useless, Ain," Tabitha said. "We need to take this higher, to someone outside Garrett's sphere of influence." "The federal marshal," Isaiah said. "There is a U.S. marshal named Holt who covers this territory. He answers to the federal government, not to local politics. If we can get this evidence to him, he will have to investigate." Tabitha carefully rewrapped the documents. Where can we find this Marshall Holt? Last I heard he was based out of Fort Smith, but he travels a circuit through Oklahoma Territory and Arkansas, Isaiah said. We would need to track him down, which could take time. Time Garrett might use to come after us, Tabitha pointed out. If he suspects I found Thomas's evidence, then we move fast and careful, Isaiah said. I will make some inquiries, find out where Holt is currently. In the meantime, those documents cannot stay at your ranch. Too easy for Garrett to search the place. They should stay with me, or better yet, we should find somewhere neither of us would be expected to hide them. Tabitha thought for a moment. The church. Pastor Williams is an honest man, and Garrett might be ruthless, but I do not think even he would dare ransack a church. Good thinking, Isaiah agreed. We can ask the pastor to hold them in his safe. Tell him it is important documents related to your family's estate. That is not even really a lie. They rode into town together, taking a route that avoided the main roads. Oklahoma City was bustling with midday activity when they arrived, and they made their way to the small wooden church at the edge of town. Pastor Williams, a kindly older man with wire-rimmed spectacles, agreed readily to store the documents in his safe without asking too many questions. The pastor had officiated at Thomas's memorial service just days ago, and his sympathy for Tabitha's loss was evident. With the evidence safely secured, they stepped back out into the bright afternoon. Isaiah was about to suggest they get something to eat when a voice called out from across the street. Miss Grayson, Mr. Jenkins, how convenient to find you both together. Tabitha's blood turned to ice. Samuel Garrett was walking toward them, flanked by two of his men. Garrett was a large man in his 50s, prosperous-looking in expensive clothes, with steel-gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His smile was pleasant, but it did not reach those eyes. Mr. Garrett, Tabitha managed to say, keeping her voice level. I heard you have been spreading some very troubling stories about me around town, Garrett said, his tone conversational, accusing me of terrible crimes, murder, theft, fraud, very serious accusations indeed. I only speak the truth, Tabitha said, meeting his gaze. The truth, Garrett repeated thoughtfully. The problem with truth, Miss Grayson, is that it requires proof, and you have none. Just grief-fueled fantasies and the imagination of a distraught woman. She is not alone in her beliefs, Isaiah said, his hand resting casually on his hip, near where his gun belt sat. There are others who have questions about your business practices. Garrett's eyes shifted to Isaiah, and something dangerous flickered in their depths. You should be careful about the company you keep, Jenkins. Men who involve themselves in affairs that do not concern them have a tendency to meet unfortunate ends. Is that a threat, Garrett? Isaiah asked, his voice mild, but his posture tense. Merely an observation, Garrett said. Oklahoma Territory is dangerous country. Accidents happen all the time. Why, look at what happened to poor Thomas Grayson, a young man in his prime taken so suddenly. His gaze returned to Tabitha, and she could see the unspoken message there. He knew she knew the truth, and he was daring her to do something about it. If you will excuse us, Mr. Garrett, Tabitha said, her voice tight. We have business to attend to. Of course, Garrett said magnanimously. I just wanted to express my concern. After all, you are a young woman alone now trying to run a ranch without your brother. That is a heavy burden. If you ever decide you want to sell, I would be happy to make you a fair offer, more than fair, given the circumstances. The audacity of it took Tabitha's breath away. He was offering to buy her ranch, the same ranch he had effectively orphaned her from by killing Thomas. I will never sell to you, she said. Garrett's pleasant expression did not change. Or never is a long time, Miss Grayson. Circumstances can change. Think about it. He tipped his hat and walked away, his men following like loyal dogs. Isaiah waited until they were out of earshot. That man knows no fear. He threatened us in broad daylight on a public street. Because he believes he is untouchable, Tabitha said, her hands shaking with anger and residual fear. He has gotten away with everything so far. Why should we be any different? Because we have evidence now, Isaiah reminded her, and because I'm going to find Marshall Holt if I have to ride to the ends of the earth to do it." He looked at her seriously. "But you need to be careful, Tabitha. Garrett is clearly watching you. It might be best if you stay with someone in town where there are witnesses." Tabitha shook her head. "I will not abandon my ranch. It is all I have left of my family. Besides, showing fear will only encourage him." "Then I will stay at your place," Isaiah said firmly. "Camp in the barn or on the porch. That way, you are not alone if Garrett sends his men." She wanted to protest, to insist she could take care of herself. But the memory of Thomas's murder was too fresh. She had been helpless to stop it, had only survived by fleeing into the darkness. "I would appreciate that," she admitted. They purchased supplies in town, careful to act casual and unhurried, then rode back to the Grayson ranch as evening approached. Isaiah set up camp in the barn, insisting he would be comfortable there, and Tabitha prepared dinner for both of them. They ate together on the porch as the sun set, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of orange and purple. "Tell me about yourself," Tabitha said, surprising herself with the question. "I realize I know almost nothing about you beyond the fact that you are willing to risk your life to help me find justice for my brother." Isaiah leaned back, considering his words. "Not much to tell. I was born in Missouri, came west after my parents died when I was 16. Been working ranches ever since, moving around, never staying in one place too long." "Why not?" Tabitha asked. "Settle down somewhere? Get your own land?" "Never had the money for land," Isaiah said. "And I suppose I got used to moving. Whenever a place starts feeling too settled, too permanent, I get restless." He glanced at her. "Though lately I have been thinking it might be nice to put down roots somewhere." There was something in the way he said it, in the way his eyes met hers, that made Tabitha's pulse quicken. She looked away, confused by her reaction. She had just lost her brother, was in the middle of a fight for her life and her land. And yet here she was noticing the way the fading sunlight caught in Isaiah's dark hair, the strong line of his jaw, the gentleness in his expression when he looked at her. "Oklahoma seems like a good place for that," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Despite everything, it is beautiful country." "It is," Isaiah agreed. But he was not looking at the landscape. He was looking at her. The moment stretched between them, charged with something unspoken, until Tabitha stood abruptly. "I should clean up and get some rest. Tomorrow we need to figure out how to find Marshall Holt." Isaiah stood as well. "I will make some inquiries first thing. Someone in town will know his circuit when he is expected in the area." "Thank you, Isaiah," Tabitha said softly, "for everything. I do not know what I would do without your help." "You would manage," Isaiah said with quiet certainty. "You are stronger than you think, Tabitha Grayson, but I am glad you do not have to do this alone." That night, Tabitha lay in bed listening to the night sounds of the ranch, aware of Isaiah's presence out in the barn. It should have felt awkward or improper, but instead she felt safer than she had since Thomas's death. She fell asleep thinking about creek water eyes and gentle smiles, and for the first time in days her dreams were not filled with blood and violence. The next morning Isaiah rode into town while Tabitha tended to ranch chores. She fed the chickens, milked the cow, checked on the small herd of cattle grazing in the near pasture. The work was familiar and soothing, a reminder that life continued even in the midst of tragedy and danger. Isaiah returned in the early afternoon with news. Marshall Holt is currently in Fort Smith, but he is scheduled to make his circuit through Oklahoma Territory starting next week. He should be in Oklahoma City in about 10 days. 10 days, Tabitha repeated. Can we wait that long? We may not have a choice unless we want to make the long journey to Fort Smith, Isaiah said. And that would mean leaving your ranch unprotected for days, possibly weeks. Garrett could move in, claim you abandoned the property. Tabitha nodded reluctantly. Then we wait. And in the meantime, we keep looking for more evidence. Thomas's documents are compelling, but the more we have, the harder it will be for Garrett to wriggle free. Over the following days, they worked together, falling into an easy partnership. Isaiah would take jobs around the area, using the opportunity to talk to other ranchers and homesteaders, carefully gathering information about Garrett's activities. Tabitha managed the ranch, but also began her own quiet investigation, visiting the families of some of the people Thomas had documented as Garrett's victims. She met Mrs. Cooper, whose husband had supposedly been thrown from his horse. The woman was struggling to keep her small farm running alone, and she confided in Tabitha that her husband had been an expert horseman, that his death made no sense. But when she had questioned it, Sheriff Morton had told her she was being emotional, that accidents happened. She met the children of Mr. Hutchins, the family that had supposedly moved east. They had indeed left their property suddenly, but not of their own free will. The eldest son, now working in a livery stable in Oklahoma City, told Tabitha in hushed tones that men working for Garrett had come in the night, threatened to kill them all if they did not sign over their land and disappear. They had fled with nothing but the clothes on their backs, too terrified to even report it to the authorities. Each story added another layer to the picture of Garrett's criminal enterprise, and Tabitha wrote everything down carefully, documenting names and dates just as Thomas had done. She was building her own case file separate from her brother's, and together they would be irrefutable. In the evenings after the work was done, she and Isaiah would sit together on the porch, sharing meals and conversation. She learned that he loved reading, though books were a luxury he rarely afforded himself. She loaned him some of Thomas's books, and they discussed them late into the night. He told her about the places he had been, the cattle drives he had worked, the vast beauty of the Western territories. She told him about growing up on the ranch, about her parents who had died within a year of each other, about Thomas's determination to make something of their family legacy. She talked about her dreams for the ranch, modest dreams, but hers nonetheless. A larger herd, better breeding stock, maybe someday a real house instead of the small cabin that currently stood. "You could do it," Isaiah said one evening, about a week after they had found Thomas's evidence. "With the right help, the right partner, you could build this place into something fine." "A partner," Tabitha repeated, looking at him. The word seemed to hang in the air between them, meaning more than just a business arrangement. Isaiah met her gaze steadily. "I know this is not the right time, with everything you are dealing with, but I want you to know something, Tabitha. Working with you these past days, getting to know you, it has made me reconsider a lot of things, made me think maybe I've been running from something instead of toward it." Her heart was beating too fast. "Isaiah, you do not have to say anything," he continued. "I just wanted you to know that when this is all over, when Garrett is behind bars and you can breathe easy again, I would very much like to stay, help you build that dream, if you would want that." Tabitha realized she was holding her breath. In the midst of darkness and fear, something bright and warm had been growing between them, and she had been afraid to acknowledge it. But looking at Isaiah now, seeing the hope and uncertainty in his eyes, she could not deny what she felt. "I would want that," she said softly. "Very much." The smile that broke across Isaiah's face was like sunrise. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Then we will see this through together. All of it." Their quiet moment was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Both of them stood, Isaiah's hand going to his gun. But the rider who emerged from the darkness was not one of Garrett's men. It was Pastor Williams, and even from a distance Tabitha could see his agitation. "Miss Grayson, Mr. Jenkins," the pastor called out as he reined his horse to a stop. "Thank the Lord I found you. The church was broken into tonight. Someone ransacked my office, broke open the safe." Tabitha's stomach dropped. "The documents?" "Gone," Pastor Williams said, his face stricken. "I am so sorry. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for. They did not take the collection money or the silver from the altar, just the case you left with me." Isaiah swore quietly. "Garrett. He must have had someone watching, saw us go into the church." "All of Thomas's evidence," Tabitha said, feeling numb. "Everything we found. It is gone." Pastor Williams wrung his hands. "I reported it to the sheriff, but he seemed more interested in suggesting I had been careless with security than in actually investigating. I am so terribly sorry." "It is not your fault, Pastor," Tabitha said, though her mind was racing. Without Thomas's original documents, what did they have? Her own notes and interviews were something, But would they be enough to convince a federal marshal to investigate, especially against a man as influential as Garrett? After the pastor left, Tabitha and Isaiah sat in the darkness of the porch, the weight of this new setback pressing down on them. "We still have your notes," Isaiah said finally, "your documentation of the interviews you conducted, and we have the stories of the victims themselves. If we can convince Marshal Holt to talk to them directly, it will be our word against Garrett's," Tabitha said hopelessly. "Testimonies from desperate people who have already lost everything. Garrett will paint us all as liars and opportunists." "Then we find more," Isaiah said firmly. "There has to be physical evidence somewhere. Garrett has been operating for years. He cannot have covered up everything perfectly." "But we do not have years to search," Tabitha pointed out. "Marshal Holt will be here in 3 days. We need something solid to present to him, something that cannot be explained away." Isaiah was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through the problem. "The land office," he said suddenly. "Thomas's documents mentioned falsified deeds and water rights certificates. The originals would have to be filed with the Territorial Land Office. If we could get access to those records, compare the original filings with what is currently on record, we might be able to prove forgery." "The land office is in Guthrie," Tabitha said. "That is a full day's ride, maybe more." "Then we leave at first light," Isaiah said. "We can be there by tomorrow evening, spend the next day examining records, and be back before Marshal Holt arrives. It is risky, but it might be our only chance." Tabitha nodded slowly. "What about the ranch? Garrett will know I'm gone." "We will ask Pastor Williams to spread the word that you have gone to stay with relatives for a few days, that you are too distraught to be alone," Isaiah suggested. "It is plausible enough, and it might throw Garrett off our trail." It was a plan, however desperate. They spent the rest of the night preparing, packing supplies for the journey, making arrangements for the livestock. Tabitha wrote out detailed instructions for her neighbor, a widow named Mrs. Patterson who she trusted, to look after the animals in her absence. They set out before dawn, riding hard across the Oklahoma Territory landscape. It was late September now, and the air had begun to carry the first hint of autumn coolness. The grasslands stretched endlessly around them, broken occasionally by clusters of trees or rocky outcroppings. They passed farms and small settlements, crossed creeks and rivers, stopped only briefly to rest the horses. As they rode, they talked, their conversations flowing easily despite the seriousness of their mission. Isaiah told her about the first time he had been bucked off a horse, a story involving a particularly ornery Mustang, and an audience of laughing ranch hands that had him ending up in a water trough. Tabitha found herself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time since Thomas's death. She told him about the time she and Thomas had gotten lost during a thunderstorm when she was 8 years old, how they had taken shelter in a cave and told stories to keep their spirits up until the storm passed, how Thomas had promised her that as long as they stuck together they could weather any storm. "He kept that promise," Isaiah said gently. "Even in death, he left you a way to fight back. That takes forethought and love." "I just wish he were still here," Tabitha said, her throat tight. "I would give anything to have him back." "I know," Isaiah said, "but the best way to honor him now is to finish what he started. Make sure his death meant something." They reached Guthrie as the sun was setting, the territorial capital bustling with activity despite the late hour. It was a larger town than Oklahoma City, with wider streets and more substantial buildings. They found lodging at a respectable boarding house, and the proprietor, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Caldwell, looked them over carefully before agreeing to rent them separate rooms. "No funny business under my roof," she said sternly, and Tabitha felt her face heat despite the innocence of their situation. "We are here on business, madam," Isaiah assured her. "Miss Grayson is settling some estate matters at the land office." Satisfied, Mrs. Caldwell showed them to their rooms, simple but clean spaces with narrow beds and wash basins. They agreed to meet for breakfast and then head to the land office first thing in the morning. Tabitha lay in her unfamiliar bed listening to the sounds of the town outside her window. She thought about Isaiah sleeping just down the hall, about how much her life had changed in such a short time. 2 weeks ago, Her biggest worry had been whether they would have enough hay to get the cattle through the winter. Now she was on a desperate mission to gather evidence against a murderer, and somewhere along the way she had fallen in love. The realization should have been shocking, but instead it felt inevitable. Isaiah had been steadfast and loyal, brave and kind. He believed her when no one else would. He stood beside her when it would have been easier and safer to walk away. How could she not love him? The next morning dawned bright and clear. They ate a hearty breakfast of eggs and bacon prepared by Mrs. Caldwell, then made their way to the Territorial Land Office. It was the imposing brick building near the center of town, and inside rows of filing cabinets and ledgers held the documented history of land ownership across Oklahoma Territory. The clerk at the front desk, a young man with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes, looked up as they entered. "Help you folks?" "We need to examine property records for the Oklahoma City area," Isaiah said, "specifically deeds and water rights filed over the past 5 years. The clerk sighed. "That is a lot of records. What exactly are you looking for? I can narrow it down if you give me specific names or parcels." Tabitha pulled out her notes, the list of properties Thomas had documented as part of Garrett's scheme. "We need to see the filings for these properties. All transfers of ownership, water rights certificates, anything related to them." The clerk took the list, scanning it with growing interest. "These are all around Oklahoma City. Is there some kind of dispute?" "You could say that," Isaiah replied carefully. "We are looking into some irregularities." "Irregularities," the clerk repeated. He looked at them more carefully. "You folks working for a lawyer or something?" "We are working for justice," Tabitha said. "Can you help us or not?" Something in her intensity must have convinced him. The clerk nodded slowly. "I can pull these files, but it will take some time. There is a reading room in the back where you can examine them. Just be careful with the documents. They are territorial property." It took nearly 2 hours for the clerk to gather all the relevant files, but finally, Tabitha and Isaiah were seated at a large table covered with property deeds, water rights certificates, and transfer documents. They worked methodically, comparing dates and signatures, looking for inconsistencies, and they found them. Dozens of irregularities that told the story of systematic fraud, deeds that showed signatures that did not match other documents signed by the same people, water rights certificates filed after the original property owners had supposedly sold their land, but before the sales were officially recorded, meaning Garrett had been claiming rights to water that did not legally belong to him at the time, transfer documents that showed suspiciously similar handwriting despite supposedly being written by different people. "This is it," Tabitha breathed, carefully making notes. "This proves forgery, proves the whole scheme." Isaiah was examining a particularly egregious example, a deed for the Cooper property that showed 3 different versions filed over the course of 6 months, each with slightly different terms, as if someone had been perfecting their forgery. The question is, how do we prove Garrett was behind it? These documents do not have his signature on them directly. Tabitha pulled out another file, but they do have the signatures of his known associates. Look, this transfer was witnessed by John Hayes. "Deputy Hayes," Isaiah said grimly, "the same man who supposedly investigated your claim about Thomas's murder and found nothing." They continued working through the documents, photographing the most damning evidence with their detailed notes. By mid-afternoon, they had compiled a substantial case showing a pattern of fraud, forgery, and illegal land acquisition that could not be explained away as coincidence or clerical error. "This is what Thomas found," Tabitha said, looking at their assembled evidence. "This is what got him killed. And this is what is going to put his killer behind bars," Isaiah added. "Now we need to get this back to Oklahoma City and into Marshal Holt's hands." They thanked the helpful clerk, who seemed to sense he had been part of something significant, and made their way back to the boarding house to collect their things. They were preparing to leave when Mrs. Caldwell intercepted them in the hallway. "Begging your pardon, but there were 2 men here asking about you while you were out," she said, her expression concerned. "Rough-looking types, said they were friends of yours, but I did not like the look of them. I told them you had already left town, heading east." Tabitha and Isaiah exchanged alarmed glances. "Can you describe them?" Isaiah asked. Mrs. Caldwell's description matched 2 of Garrett's known enforcers, Somehow, he had discovered their trip to Guthrie and sent men after them. "We need to leave now," Isaiah said, "and take a different route back. If they are watching the main road, we will have to go around even if it takes longer." They thanked Mrs. Caldwell for her quick thinking and slipped out the back of the boarding house, making their way to the livery where they had stabled their horses. The sun was already beginning its descent, and Tabitha knew that traveling at night was dangerous, but staying in Guthrie was even more dangerous. They rode out of town heading north, as if going toward Kansas, then circled back east once they were out of sight of the main roads. Isaiah set a punishing pace, clearly concerned about pursuit. The landscape grew more rugged as they traveled, the flat grasslands giving way to rolling hills and rocky terrain. Night fell, and they had no choice but to keep riding by moonlight, trusting their horses to navigate the uncertain ground. Tabitha was exhausted, her body aching from the long hours in the saddle, but fear kept her alert. Every shadow could be Garrett's men, every sound a potential threat. Finally, as the moon reached its zenith, Isaiah called a halt. "The horses need rest, and so do we. We will stop for a few hours, then press on before dawn." They found a sheltered spot among a cluster of rocks, a natural formation that provided cover and a good vantage point. Isaiah built a small, smokeless fire to ward off the chill, and they huddled close to it, sharing dried meat and water from their canteens. "Do you think they're following us?" Tabitha asked quietly. "Maybe," Isaiah admitted, "but we have a head start, and they do not know which route we took. With luck, we will make it back to Oklahoma City before Marshal Holt arrives." Tabitha pulled her coat tighter around herself. The temperature had dropped significantly with nightfall, and she found herself shivering despite the fire. Isaiah noticed and moved closer, offering his warmth without a word. She leaned against him gratefully, too tired to worry about propriety. "When this is over," Isaiah said softly, "when Garrett is in custody and you are safe, I want to court you properly. Take you to dinners in town, maybe a church social or two. Let the whole world know that I'm serious about you." Tabitha smiled in the darkness. "You are already serious about me. You have been risking your life for days to help me find justice." "That is just basic human decency," Isaiah said. "What I feel for you goes way beyond that." "I love you, Tabitha Grayson. I think I have from the moment you refused to back down to Sheriff Morton, all fire and determination despite being terrified." Her breath caught. She had known, of course, had felt it growing between them, but hearing him say the words made it real and immediate and wonderful. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel anything but grief and anger after Thomas died, but you showed me I could still hope, still dream about the future." He turned to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "May I kiss you?" "Please," she said, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and sweet and full of promise. The kiss deepened, and for a moment the danger and fear faded away. There was only this, only them. Only the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. They held each other close as the fire burned down to embers, taking what rest they could. When the eastern sky began to lighten, they rose stiffly, rekindled the fire briefly to warm themselves and prepare a quick breakfast, then set out again. The journey back to Oklahoma City took most of the day. They rode cautiously, keeping to less traveled paths, always watching for signs of pursuit. By late afternoon, exhausted and saddle-sore, they finally saw the familiar outlines of Oklahoma City in the distance. "We made it," Tabitha said, relief flooding through her. "Now we just need to find Marshal Holt and pray he is willing to listen," Isaiah said. They rode into town, drawing curious stares from townspeople who recognized Tabitha. No doubt her absence had been noted, and gossip was the primary entertainment in a town like this. They went first to the sheriff's office, not to report to Morton, but to inquire about Marshal Holt's arrival. The deputy at the desk, a young man Tabitha did not recognize, informed them that Marshal Holt had arrived that very morning and was currently staying at the hotel on Main Street. "He is here," Tabitha said as they walked toward the hotel. "Isaiah, he is actually here." "Then let us go make our case," Isaiah said, "and hope to God he is the honest lawman people say he is." Marshal Daniel Holt was a lean man in his 40s with steel gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He received them in his hotel room, which he had converted into a temporary office complete with a desk covered in documents and wanted posters. He listened patiently as Tabitha told her story from beginning to end, not interrupting, his expression giving nothing away. When she finished, including the details of their journey to Guthrie and the evidence they had compiled, Marshal Holt leaned back in his chair and studied them both carefully. "That is quite a tale," he said finally. "Quite an accusation against a prominent businessman." "It is the truth," Tabitha said, "and we have evidence to back it up. Documentation of forgery, witness testimony from victims, a pattern of fraud stretching back years." "May I see this evidence?" Holt asked. They spread out their notes, Tabitha's carefully documented interviews, the copies they had made of the land office records. Marshal Holt examined everything meticulously, asking pointed questions, testing their story for inconsistencies. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the marshal sat back. "I have heard rumors about Samuel Garrett for some time now," he admitted. "Whispers of corruption, intimidation. But whispers are not enough for a federal case. What you have brought me, however, is substantial. If even half of this holds up under scrutiny, Garrett is looking at serious federal charges." Hope flared bright in Tabitha's chest. "Then you will investigate?" "I will do more than investigate," Marshal Holt said. "I will bring in federal prosecutors and auditors. We will go through every property transaction Garrett has been involved in with a fine-tooth comb. If he has been defrauding settlers and forging documents, we will prove it." "And my brother's murder?" Tabitha asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Will you investigate that as well?" Marshal Holt's expression softened. "I will. Though without a body or direct witnesses to the actual killing, that will be harder to prove. But if Garrett and his men go down for fraud and corruption, I promise you I will find every scrap of evidence related to your brother's death. Sometimes justice takes time, but it does come." Isaiah spoke up. "Garrett knows we have been gathering evidence. He already stole documents we had secured and sent men after us in Guthrie. He is not going to sit quietly while you investigate." "Which is why my first action will be to place him under arrest," Marshal Holt said. "Federal authorities supersede local law enforcement. I do not need Sheriff Morton's permission or cooperation. I will take Garrett into custody tonight, hold him while we conduct our investigation." Tabitha felt tears of relief threatening to fall. "Thank you, Marshal. Thank you for believing me." "I believe in evidence, Miss Grayson," Holt said kindly, "and you brought me plenty of it. Now I will need both of you to stay available for further questioning and potentially to testify before a federal grand jury. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," they both agreed. Good. I would also suggest you both stay somewhere public and visible for the next few days, Senora," the marshal added. "If Garrett decides to take desperate action, I want you where he cannot easily get to you. The hotel has rooms available." They agreed to his suggestion, and after leaving the marshal's office, they secured 2 rooms at the hotel. Within the hour, word had spread through Oklahoma City that a federal marshal was in town and that he was investigating Samuel Garrett. The town buzzed with shock and speculation. That evening, as the sun set, Marshal Holt, accompanied by 2 federal deputies who had ridden in with him, arrested Samuel Garrett at his large house on the edge of town. Garrett protested loudly, threatened legal action, invoked the names of powerful friends, but none of it mattered. Federal authority trumped local influence, and Garrett was escorted to the territorial jail in shackles. Tabitha watched from the hotel window as Garrett was led past, and their eyes met briefly. The hatred in his gaze was palpable, but so was something else. Fear. For the first time, Samuel Garrett understood that he might actually face consequences for his actions. Over the following days, Marshal Holt's investigation proceeded with methodical efficiency. Federal auditors arrived to examine the land office records in detail. Witnesses were interviewed, including all the people Tabitha had spoken with. Deputy Hayes was arrested on charges of corruption and conspiracy. Several other Garrett associates, realizing the walls were closing in, began cooperating with authorities, providing testimony in exchange for lighter sentences. The case against Garrett grew stronger by the day. The forgeries were proven beyond doubt. The pattern of intimidation and fraud was established through multiple independent witnesses. And then, in a breakthrough that made Tabitha weep with relief and renewed grief, they found Thomas's body. One of Garrett's former associates, hoping to secure a deal with prosecutors, led Marshal Holt to a remote ravine about 15 miles from the Grayson ranch. There, in a shallow grave covered with rocks and brush, they found what remained of Thomas Grayson. The bullet wound in his back confirmed he had been murdered, shot from behind as Tabitha had witnessed. With physical evidence of murder added to the extensive documentation of fraud, Garrett's fate was sealed. He was formally charged with murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, forgery, and a host of other federal crimes. His trial would take place in federal court, and the prosecutors were confident of a conviction. Through all of this, Isaiah remained at Tabitha's side. He held her when she broke down after learning about Thomas's body being recovered. He stood beside her at her brother's proper funeral, this time with the full story known and Thomas recognized as a hero who had died trying to expose corruption. He was there during her testimony before the grand jury, waiting patiently outside the courthouse until she emerged. And slowly, as justice ground forward with its inexorable weight, Tabitha began to heal. The grief would never fully disappear, but it became manageable, transformed from a raw wound into a scar that would always be part of her, but would not define her. The trial took place in early November, a surprisingly swift timeline thanks to the overwhelming evidence and the federal government's desire to make an example of territorial corruption. Tabitha and Isaiah both testified, along with dozens of other witnesses. The defense attorneys tried their best, but there was no denying the mountain of evidence against their client. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts. Samuel Garrett was sentenced to life in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. Several of his associates received prison sentences of their own. Deputy Hayes was stripped of his badge and sent to prison for 20 years. Sheriff Morton, while not directly implicated in the crimes, was pressured to resign in disgrace. In the aftermath, the territorial government began the complex process of sorting out property ownership, returning stolen lands to their rightful owners or their heirs. The Grayson Ranch remained safely in Tabitha's hands, along with formal recognition that her brother had been a champion of justice. As winter settled over Oklahoma territory, Tabitha and Isaiah finally had the peace to think about their future. Isaiah had moved into the ranch house properly now, though he maintained the proprieties by sleeping in Thomas's old room until they could be properly married. They planned a modest wedding for Christmas, with Pastor Williams officiating and the whole community invited. On a cold December morning, Tabitha Grayson became Tabitha Jenkins, and Isaiah became not just a drifter who took temporary work, but a man with a home, a wife, and a purpose. They honeymooned at the ranch because neither of them wanted to be anywhere else, and they spent those winter days planning their future. Isaiah proved to be every bit the partner he had promised. He knew cattle and horses, understood ranching in a way that complemented Tabitha's own knowledge. Together they began to build the dream she had shared with Thomas, expanding the herd, improving their breeding stock, making careful investments in the ranch's future. The following spring, they learned Tabitha was pregnant, and the joy of that news filled the house that had seen so much sorrow. Isaiah was tender and attentive throughout her pregnancy, building a cradle with his own hands, painting Thomas's old room to transform it into a nursery. Their son was born on a clear September morning, almost exactly a year after Thomas's death. They named him Thomas Isaiah Jenkins, honoring both the brother who had fought for justice and the father who would raise him in a world made better by that fight. As Tabitha held her newborn son, with Isaiah sitting beside her on their bed, his arm around her shoulders, she thought about how much had changed. She had been a woman whose claims were dismissed as fantasy, whose grief and trauma were treated as hysteria. She had been powerless and alone, facing an enemy who seemed untouchable. But she had found an ally in a wandering cowboy who believed her when no one else would. Together they had found proof that made the law listen, evidence that could not be ignored or explained away. They had brought a murderer to justice and exposed a network of corruption that had plagued the territory for years. More than that, they had found love in the midst of darkness. They had built a life together that honored the past while embracing the future. The ranch that Thomas had dreamed of improving was now thriving under their combined stewardship. The community that had once doubted Tabitha now looked to her with respect. "What are you thinking?" Isaiah asked softly, looking down at her with that expression of love that still made her heart skip a beat, even after a year of marriage. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Tabitha said honestly. "How much I have gained even after losing so much. Thomas would be happy for us, I think. Happy that the ranch is doing well, that his nephew will grow up here, that his fight for justice was not in vain." "He would be proud of you," Isaiah said. "You are the bravest person I have ever known, Tabitha. You never gave up even when everyone told you to." "I had help," she said, smiling at him. "A certain stubborn cowboy who refused to let me face it alone." "Best decision I ever made," Isaiah said, kissing her forehead gently. "Staying here, fighting beside you, loving you, all of it. Best decision of my life." Baby Thomas made a small sound, and they both laughed softly, their attention returning to the new life they had created together. Outside, the Oklahoma sun shone down on the Grayson Ranch, which would soon have a new sign reading Jenkins Family Ranch hanging at the entrance. The cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures. The creek still burbled its eternal song through the cottonwood trees. In the town of Oklahoma City, people went about their daily business in a community that had been forever changed by one woman's determination to see justice done and one man's willingness to help her find the proof to make it happen. Sheriff Morton's replacement was honest and competent, determined to restore faith in local law enforcement. The families who had lost their land were slowly being made whole, reclaiming what had been stolen from them. And in the small church where Tabitha and Isaiah had been married, Pastor Williams kept in his safe a different set of documents now. The original evidence that Thomas Grayson had compiled, donated by his sister to the Territorial Historical Society, as a reminder that truth, no matter how difficult to prove, would always eventually come to light. As the years passed, the Jenkins family grew. 2 more children were born, a daughter they named Grace and another son they named William. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Tabitha became known not just as the woman who brought down Samuel Garrett, but as a savvy businesswoman and a pillar of the community. Isaiah's reputation as a fair and honest rancher spread throughout the territory. They told their children the story of how they met, how Uncle Thomas had been a hero who fought against injustice, how their father had believed their mother when no one else would, how love and determination could overcome even the darkest circumstances. The children grew up knowing that truth mattered, that justice was worth fighting for, and that the right partner could help you weather any storm. On the anniversary of Thomas's death each year, Tabitha would ride out to the creek where she and Isaiah had found the hidden evidence. She would sit among the cottonwood trees and talk to her brother, telling him about the ranch, about her children, about the life she had built on the foundation he had laid. And she would thank him for his courage, for his determination to document the truth, even knowing it might cost him everything. Isaiah always found her there eventually, sitting beside her without a word, offering silent support as he had from the very beginning. Then they would ride home together hand in hand to the ranch they had built, the family they had created, the life they had fought so hard to protect and preserve. Samuel Garrett died in prison 10 years after his conviction, an old man broken by captivity, his wealth and influence stripped away. When Tabitha heard the news, she felt not triumph but a quiet sense of closure. Justice had been served. Her brother could rest in peace. The nightmares that had plagued her for so long finally began to fade. By the time Tabitha and Isaiah celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, the Oklahoma Territory had become a state, and the wild frontier of their youth had transformed into settled communities and thriving towns. But they still lived on the ranch, still raised cattle, still told stories of the old days to their grandchildren. "Do you ever regret it?" Tabitha asked Isaiah one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, much as they had done that first week when he had promised to help her find justice. "Giving up the wandering life? Settling down here?" Isaiah looked at her with those creek water eyes that still made her heart flutter even after 2 decades together. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "You gave me something I did not even know I was looking for. A home, a purpose, a love deeper than the Oklahoma sky. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." She leaned against him, content and at peace. "I love you, Isaiah Jenkins." "And I love you, Tabitha Jenkins," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always have, always will." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Tabitha thought about the journey that had brought them here, from tragedy and terror to triumph and tenderness, from being dismissed and disbelieved to being vindicated and valued, from facing a powerful enemy alone to building a powerful legacy together. Her claims had been dismissed as fantasy by the law, but the cowboy had found proof that made them listen. And in doing so, he had found not just justice, but love, not just vindication, but a future bright with promise. The Wild West was still wild in many ways, still dangerous and unpredictable, but it was also full of possibility for those brave enough to seize it. And seize it they had, building a life that honored the past while embracing the future, raising children who understood the value of truth and the power of determination, creating a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The Jenkins family ranch stood as a testament to what could be achieved when 2 people stood together against impossible odds, when love proved stronger than hate, when justice finally prevailed over corruption. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge in the vast Oklahoma sky, Tabitha and Isaiah went inside to the home they had built together, closing the door on another day, but never on the love that had sustained them through the darkest times and flourished in the light of peace. Their story was one of heartache and healing, of loss and love, of a woman who refused to be silenced and a man who gave her the voice to be heard. It was a story of the Wild West where legends were born and justice, however delayed, always found a way to prevail in the end.